I must have been 8 or 9 years old when I first realized that I would never witness the Zephyr's arrival. As a small child, I often imagined myself stepping foot on Eurus D, leaving the ship for the first time in my life. I didn't understand at the time that this was a privilege reserved for my grandchildren. I still remember the conversation I had with my father. He was uncomfortable about the whole thing, and I get it. People don't like talking about their children's mortality. Still, he made me feel better. He reminded me of the importance of our mission for the survival of mankind. We're the only egg in the second basket, he said, or something like that. The basket being Eurus D, a habitable planet just 4 light years away from Earth. And the egg, that's the roughly 1,300 people aboard the Zephyr. Everyone I'll ever know. I knew that Dad was worried about me. He'd noticed that I'd been sleeping a lot lately and virtually stopped socializing. I wasn't sure at the time what was wrong with me, but I found it harder and harder to get motivated. Dad seemed to be pretty shaken up, but I didn't understand why this detail was such a big deal to him. And what did the captain know about it? notes for my speech, even though I wasn't reading a word of it. We had agreed to frame my father's death as an unfortunate accident, to keep the intruder a secret in the name of public peace and safety. It was our highest imperative. If there was a person between the ship's population and their safety, they would get crushed by design. There was no security override to save the individual. In a way, this concept made sense to me. It had to. After all, I was the chief of security now. My handbook said that I had to allow myself to grieve, live through the pain to overcome it. I tried to bottle it all up instead, but my thoughts kept circling to the events of that night. It had been weeks, and we still had no idea who we'd been chasing down there, or what they'd tried to accomplish. I kept thinking that things would have played out differently if only I'd acted faster. I worked a lot to keep my mind in check. Everybody was out celebrating Arrival Day, but I was glad that the captain called me over. As soon as I was back on my feet, I checked my PDA and found a message from the captain. She wanted me to come see her on the bridge. I decided to take the long way around the ring and assess the damage on my way. Broken objects were scattered everywhere. Some walls were covered in fresh dents and splattered liquids. A large chunk of the population had been injured. Once or twice, I believed to catch someone glancing at me. I was ashamed that I hadn't been around to help everyone right after the incident. I wanted to say something to the people, but instead I lowered my head and picked up the pace. My sense of balance was off. I tripped and almost fell multiple times. Finally, I made it to the bridge and, to my relief, immediately spotted my sergeants and the captain in relatively good shape. exited the conference room, 1,000 questions started forming in my head. If the hackers' sole intention had been to divert the ship, why did they specifically set course to the Otis system? Were they planning to orbit the star for the rest of time? I immediately felt that Talia wasn't telling me the whole truth, but I knew that prying would have been pointless. She had a habit of tightly controlling the flow of information, and in most instances, it was probably wise and well-intentioned. I would get my answers soon enough anyway. Time everybody received the ominous message, I wasn't yet aware of the broad support it would quickly garner in the general population. A crowd started forming in the residential area. Tensions would soon grow to the point that the captain decided to issue a partial lockdown of the ship. I don't think it helped the situation. first few seconds after Michio left, I panicked and I thought I might run out of air. Once I managed to calm myself down, I felt anger well up. Anger at Michio and at myself for falling into his trap. Whatever he was up to, I knew I needed to get out and stop him. The doors of the decontamination chamber were made of a thick glass and didn't have any handles. A control terminal on the side wall had been ripped out. I drew my gun and aimed it at the glass. Michio had to have considered that I was carrying it. For a second, I wondered if there was some gas in the room that would blow me to pieces once I pulled the trigger. I brushed the thought off and closed my eyes. The shot painfully rang in my ears. There was a small bullet hole in the door. I pulled the trigger a second time, a third time, but not a single crack started forming. I paused. I had 6 more bullets, but it started to look futile. Then I spotted it, a glowing control panel across the room. What if I tried to disable? Would the doors open, or would I trap myself for good? I took aim and held my breath. For a while after I woke up, I didn't move a muscle. I tried not to make myself aware of my body, to exist as little as possible. I stared at the ceiling, Michio's dead eyes staring back at me. The urgency of the situation around me had completely faded away. I finally noticed that Paul had entered my bunk and was trying to talk to me. In the final hour before things came to a head, you could cut the tension in the command area with a knife. The crew knew that there was very little time left to save the mission. The population, meanwhile, knew barely anything at all, which understandably upset them. By now, Talia had ordered a partial lockdown of the ship for fear of intervention. It was an unprecedented move, a drastic decision even by her standards. She barely even seemed to trust the crew around her. It was somewhat understandable, but I couldn't help but feel that she had some responsibility for her predicament. She had increasingly avoided direct communication with the general population for a long time, and now she was afraid they would make their voices heard no matter what. She was probably aware of the bitter irony herself. When you're all stuck in a place together, how do you judge or punish your fellow captives? And after a period of turmoil and unrest, who even judges whom in the end? The people who happen to come out on top, certainly aren't innocent either. The ethics committee struggled with this problem and decided early on that there wouldn't be any severe punishments such as lengthy prison sentences. Of course, pretending that nothing happened wasn't an option either. We had to strike a balance to keep our little society somewhat functional. It took us months to work through all the accusations and evidence. Between certain individuals, some residual animosity can still be felt to this day. After shooting Eric in direct defiance of my orders, Enforcer Bodo was suspended and permanently lost his weapons privileges. Luckily, Eric survived the shooting and slowly recovered at the hospital over the next few months. Joseph insisted that Eric should not be charged for attempting to attack him in the navigation room. There was a long debate about whether Eric's decision to divert the ship's course was selfish or selfless. Everybody believed his claim that the power outage had been accidental, but that didn't take away from its catastrophic consequences. 4 people had died, and many more had suffered severe and long-lasting injuries. At least the damages to the ship turned out to be mostly superficial. The Ethics Committee noted that, regardless of his intent, motive, or state of mind, Eric's actions had been incredibly reckless. He spent the weeks leading up to his sentencing in the brig. The Ethics Committee revoked his access to the bridge and permanently relegated him to the inner hull. The handling of the dissident group was probably the most complicated part. It seemed like the ship was split right down the middle. Half of us celebrated them as heroes, and the other half wanted to see them punished. The compromise ended up being very light sentences for all participants, considering their generally non-violent approach. To this day, it's not entirely clear who participated in the movement and what their roles were. Ava admitted to having planned the insurrection for over a year. She began her testimony by recounting a late-night conversation at the bar with Geraldo, Michio, and some additional people whose names she wouldn't divulge. She was surprised to be met with universal agreement when she aired her grievances about the Zephyr's rigid social structure. Over the next few months, she went on to formulate a list of demands that slowly morphed into a manifesto for self-determination, which she deemed incompatible with the goals of the mission. She came up with a system to recruit allies without leaving a trace on the Zephyr's networks, which we stumbled upon when the letter in the inner hull was discovered. At that point, the movement and its talking points had already gained a lot of support in the general population. Taking the server online and sending out a mass broadcast on arrival day was meant to bring public pressure to a boiling point. However, the plan was delayed when the power outage occurred on that same day through sheer coincidence. Ava and her accomplices had no knowledge of the hack or its intended purpose. When they looked into it through their network, Noelia quickly cracked and revealed the truth about Otis B. The group then devised the plan of putting the course change to a vote and allow the people, as they put it, to be the masters of their own destiny. In a last-ditch attempt to force the vote, they made the decision to storm the bridge and stall the course correction. Ava was not shown much leniency for shooting Talia. Even though Captain Curtis hadn't had the best relationship with his mother, he seemingly made it very clear to the ethics committee behind the scenes that her murder was not to go unpunished. At least the shooting was deemed not premeditated, and Ava claimed she did not shoot to kill. Regardless, she spent the entire following year in the brig and lost access rights to much of the ship once she was let go. She still works at the school in an administrative capacity, but is no longer allowed to directly teach students herself. I was thoroughly questioned about my role in the whole ordeal. The main charge against me was the use of excessive force against Michio, resulting in his death. Our final encounter haunts me to this day. I'll never forget the way he collapsed, the endless amounts of blood spilling out onto the floor. I immediately rushed to provide first aid, but as soon as I saw his blank eyes staring back at me, I knew there was nothing I could do. My memory of the following hour or two is still very fuzzy. I know I called Paul and just sat there until he arrived. Someone brought me to my bunk and helped me wash off the blood. Then I fell asleep on my bed for a while. Even though he attacked me first, I fully blame myself for Michio's death. I kept thinking about alternative ways the whole thing could have played out. The ethics committee ultimately ruled that I shot him in self-defense. I didn't receive any formal punishment, which left me with mixed feelings. Sometimes I question whether I should continue doing these recordings. They're explicitly meant for a time when I'm long dead. I think I'm just trying to take part in the future in some minuscule way. I never got to see Euros D myself, but at least someone who will remembers me.